Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today, for those of you viewing the video version of this podcast over on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, you can see I'm flying solo, and I'm flying solo, but I'm flying low today. The allergies and everything, a little nasally. I'm worn out, folks, and it's not just the Steelers that are exhausting me, but I'm here on my own, and it might be a little not as long-winded as usual, but trust me, I got some things that I need to discuss. I got a problem with you people, as the famous Jerry Stiller would say on Seinfeld during Festivus. Of course, it's not Festivus season yet. Let's get to Thanksgiving first, unlike some of the retailers putting all the Christmas stuff out, right? And I think that's where a lot of the Steelers fans out there are already thinking ahead. They're thinking ahead down the road. They're thinking Sunday, with some of the things going on that I'm going to mention here in a second. They got a matchup. The Steelers do their unbeaten streak on the line, as it is every game until somebody actually does defeat them. 8-0 Steelers taking on the 2-5-1. That's right, they got the tie. Cincinnati Bengals, and the Steelers finally with a game at Heinz Field for the first time in a while. Seems like they were there all the time, and now, after 3 consecutive road games, they get to come back home. But it might be some bittersweet news. On one hand, the defense appears to perhaps get a few players back. Tyson Alualu limited in practice on Wednesday. Mike Hilton a full practice. Derek Watt a full practice. And then a boatload of do not practice. Some of those along the offensive line, some guys that could use some rest like Marquise Pouncey, Dave DeCastro, Alejandro Villanueva, all the veteran privilege right there. Eric Ebron, Stephon Tuitt, who's been lighting the world on fire. If you're paying attention to Pro Football Focus, he's up there in the top 10, I believe the top 10, right along. I think TJ Watt is like top 3, 4, maybe even one of the best at pressuring in the league. Even if I did have the premium stats in front of me, I don't have the license to tell you all of those things, unfortunately. So I'm just going to skirt tail what they end up saying on Twitter, or else I could get myself in trouble because people pay lots and lots of money to have those things, namely Sunday Night Football. And if you're watching Sunday Night Football the other night, man, what a game that was, right? And even Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth were making fun of the Saints-Bucks deal a little bit there, and Al Michaels took a jab at Chris Collinsworth, of course, saying, "Don't you own Pro Football Focus?" or something like that. So that was actually kind of funny. But the Steelers are reloading here, and that's a little important because the number one scare, of course, even though the Steelers have won their last nine games straight against the Cincinnati Bengals, there may not be Ben Roethlisberger. Vance McDonald, as you may or may not already be aware, tested positive for COVID-19 earlier in the week. I believe it was Monday. And a bunch of players with the contact tracing, have been put into a quarantine. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible to play this upcoming Sunday against Cincinnati. However, being a home game actually benefits the Steelers because you've seen this with other teams where they board the plane on Saturday and guys get left behind. They have a little bit of extra time here to play around and make sure that everyone tests negative to play. The big one, obviously, Big Ben Roethlisberger, and that's got Steelers Nation just saying all kinds of nonsense. Forget the fact that Vince Williams might be sidelined as well as Vance McDonald, and I'm trying to think there was one other person here as well that was also put on the list. I'll find that for you here in a second, of course, because I have a computer in front of me. Thank you, everyone. Let's see. Chris Wormley. Chris Wormley. I'm sorry, that's IR. Let me see. I scrolled too far. Reserve injured, reserve retired, practice squad. COVID-19. Gerald Hawkins. And I joked about Jalen Samuels, who, believe it or not, a large part of the offense. Do you remember this? It was, week 5 last year, and the Steelers, they kind of righted the ship here with the Bengals. Week 4. They had lost 3 games in a row the whooping by the Patriots, the close game with the Seahawks where they lost by 2, and then the game in San Francisco, again, where a fumble ended up costing them, giving the 49ers some good field position. It seemed like the team was just on the cusp. But, however, they had to transition over to Mason Rudolph as the starting quarterback, of which he was against this Cincinnati Bengals team back in Week 4, and that was the cure for the common cold. Man, I am punny today. Anyways, 27-3, the Steelers ended up rocking the Bengals then. I understand it's not exactly the same Bengals team, but in many ways it still is. But there's a lot of folks out there that are very concerned about whether or not if Ben can play. Obviously, he took the low shot last Sunday, hobbled around the field, and maybe some knee problems. Will Mike Tomlin be cautious? We've seen it before. Aditi Kikwala pointed this out as well. My boy, the GOAT, as far as backups, Landry Jones. I'm going to be talking a lot about backup quarterbacks again. If you remember, if you've listened to this show for a while, this is a major bugaboo how fans everywhere think the backup quarterback should come in and be this savior for the team, be a god, walk on water, and do no wrong. There are backups in the league for a reason. They've either failed as being a starting quarterback somewhere else, which is where everybody wants that experienced backup quarterback. Well, that just means if he's experienced, is Brian Hoyer a winner necessarily? Put him in the right situation, I get it. But going back to the Sunday Night Football, Chris Collinsworth mentions Jameis Winston's coming in. He's going to throw the ball and somebody's going to catch it. We just don't know which team. And I thought, man, that's pretty bad when you got the announcers even talking about Jameis Winston, who was the 30 for 30 club. Only guy that's ever done that, 30-plus touchdowns and 30-plus interceptions in the same season. And so a lot of people wanted Winston. A lot of people wanted Cam Newton to come in, but the Steelers were developing Mason Rudolph, who they felt had a first-round grade when they selected him 2 years ago out of Oklahoma State. And, of course, going back to the quarterback battle that they had in 2019's preseason. There was no preseason this year, obviously, but it was Mason Rudolph against Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs lost that job handily with some pretty poor statistics, and 2 weeks into the season was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a fifth-round pick. And the reason the Steelers did that, some teams still saw some developmental value, and Jacksonville at that time had lost Nick Foles, who they had just signed to a big contract to be their starter, and they needed somebody with a little bit of experience and maybe even similar systems and things of that nature. People know, a guy, they know a guy. Well, Josh Dobbs, his tenure in Jacksonville didn't last very long, and he ended up coming back this offseason. But the reason I'm bringing all of this up, these are the names being thrown around, as is Duck Hodges, as is Paxton Lynch and J.T. Barrett. J.T. Barrett didn't even come to training camp. Throw the name out. He wasn't even on the roster when this process started back in August. Paxton Lynch was there and lost outright. Steelers brought Dobbs in at the tail end of all of this. In fact, I may be incorrect. Lynch may have been signed to the practice squad, but Duck Hodges is the one that was released. He got the QB3 job. He was released to bring Dobbs on after Dobbs was released by the Jaguars, and then they brought Duck Hodges back to the practice squad. Now, a lot of people are like, hey, could Duck Hodges play, blah, blah, blah. Let's first decide, is Ben going to play or not? Ben will play through pain, for better or for worse. At least for the Steelers, this couldn't have happened at a better time in their schedule. They're playing the Bengals, 2-5-1. They get to play the Jacksonville Jaguars coming up, who, let me see, I believe the Jaguars, I lost it here. Jaguars are a one-win team, I do believe, on the season. And if you're going to sit Ben Roethlisberger, because either you're forced to because he's on the COVID list and maybe he tests positive, or you're just going to give the veteran a break, maybe he's going to be listed as the backup quarterback. Mike Tomlin, like I said, Aditi Kikwala pointed this out. They played the Cleveland Browns several years ago. Landry Jones ends up starting that game. He plays like one series. He jacked up his hand or his knee or his ankle or something. He had like a really goofy thing that happened. He slipped, if I recall correctly. And they brought Ben Roethlisberger in, and then he shattered all kinds of records as a Steelers backup. Air quotes here for those of you listening to this podcast on the audio version. I got my hands in the air. The little Dr. Evil air quotes, Big Ben as a backup. hilarious, but it happened. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Back in 2018, if you remember the X-ray machine at the Oakland Raiders, Mike Tomlin did not put Big Ben back in until the very end of that game, and they ended up losing. That's just so happened to be Josh Dobbs, really his only real true experience. He did get in a game against a blowout game on a Thursday night against the Carolina Panthers. But a lot of folks are sitting here, they're already assuming Ben's not going to play. I'm going to go with that storyline just for a second. If Tomlin is cautious with his quarterback, either because of his knees or because he simply doesn't clear and come off this list and is able to play, they are going to be playing a Bengals team that comes off of a bye week, and they're going to be fresh, and they won their previous game against the Tennessee Titans, who could not get after the quarterback. The Titans were so bad in this game. They didn't get to Joe Burrow at all. I think they only had like 4 pressures, and it's not because the Bengals offensive line is like these behemoths. In fact, they had several guys. They had a center, a guard out. I believe they moved somebody else to left tackle that was like a 6th-round pick, a former 6th-round pick, and he did well, but that's the reason why they canned Vic Beasley. That's the reason why Jonathan Joseph was released as a corner. He gave up like 100 yards on like 4 passes. I don't think you're going to see the same type of performance with the Bengals against the Steelers, regardless if Ben Roethlisberger is there or not. I want to go and rewind a little bit, too, to last year also. Pittsburgh Steelers offense, jeez, they played so many freaking guys. It was ridiculous. Now, this year, just for comparison so far, they have had 29 different players take an offensive snap, and it's kind of a misnomer here because you also count Minkah Fitzpatrick as part of that in victory formation, which Minkah Fitzpatrick did not do last season. So he took the old Troy Polamalu role, as some of you may be aware. The offense last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if I'm pulling up the right numbers here, okay, so they had 31 different guys, but they had as many as 45, I believe, that dressed for offense. These are the guys that all took a snap. You had guys like Tony Brooks-James, Deion Kane, Trey Edmonds, who just got called back up to the main roster, by the way. B.J. Finney was in there quite a bit. You had Xavier Grimble, Zach Gentry, who hasn't been active for a game yet, the second round or the second-year tight end out of Michigan, 5th rounder last season. You had Duck Hodges come in because Mason Rudolph took a dirty shot from Earl Thomas, was concussed, put in the concussion protocol, and you were forced to play Duck Hodges. It wasn't like Mason was benched. Yes, Mason gets benched later after a short week where the Steelers have to go up to Cleveland for Thursday Night Football, lose. Well, I think both guys were questionable to go into the game, and they gave it a go, and they couldn't go. Juju Smith-Schuster lost during that game. James Conner lost during that game. Deontay Johnson hit. You remember the bleeding out of the ear, the helmet thing? That was that same game where Mason Rudolph throws 4 picks. Prior to that, Rudolph didn't really he didn't kill the team a whole lot. He had 9 interceptions for the whole year, 13 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, but 13-5 if you take out the short week, the little preparation, losing a lot of star players. And I always bring up a lot of these other names that end up being in there because everybody just wants to relate. You forget that Dante Moncrief was on this team and cut by week 9, so he didn't lose a compensatory pick. Who else? Jalen Samuels, as I mentioned in that week 4 game last year against the Bengals. J/, we were calling him because of the Wildcat stuff, which then ends up failing later, and they canned that whole idea. But he actually took, I think he threw 3 passes, and he ran the ball a little bit. He had some snaps. If you're going back to that game, let me see. Jalen Samuels, plays almost half the game there. The Steelers were without James, as everybody was saying, James Conner, really fragile, right? And especially toward the second half of the season, he didn't have a whole lot of snaps even through the beginning of the season. 46%, 54, 68, 64. He gets up to 80 week 5 against Baltimore, which is also an overtime game. 50, 83, doesn't play, 18, doesn't play. 13 snaps between 6 games. And then 58-13 gets hurt again, doesn't play the final game of the season at Baltimore. Juju Smith-Schuster misses 2 games last year, too. Not on the field, nowhere near. 4 games last year. He gets hurt in 1 game. That same Thursday night game, only plays 30% of that game. And then misses the 4 games there, too, which also hurts Duck Hodges, too. Make no mistake about it, both quarterbacks were struggling with having help. Offensive line was shuffled around a little bit as well. Marquise Pouncey also gets suspended from that Thursday night game, misses 2 games, which would also be the other Cincinnati game that was played in Cincinnati, which Mason Rudolph was pulled for lack of performance. He just wasn't getting it done. Prior to losing that Thursday night football game, though, Mason Rudolph had ripped off 3 straight wins against the Miami Dolphins, Indianapolis Colts, Los Angeles Rams. Dolphins were a dumpster fire. Colts end up losing Jacoby Brissett as a starter, and I understand they got some help from the defense. This is almost practically the same defense, though, folks. Maybe even better if you understand where I'm coming from. So the support system's still there. A lot of people are ragging on a potential Mason Rudolph playing. I think if he has the full complement of guys, you're also adding Eric Ebron and Chase Claypool to this mix as well. So you've got all the other guys that are healthy there. Benny Snell wasn't even healthy last year. I think he would do just fine. People want to leapfrog over the backup quarterback straight to Josh Dobbs. Let's talk about Josh Dobbs for a second, because I've heard a lot of different critiques about this. And I was talking online as I do, and I get in these conversations with some of these fans. And they're talking about, well, Dobbs wasn't really given an opportunity in the 2019 preseason. No, Mason Rudolph was given an opportunity. Dobbs, who had won the backup job the year before in 2018 and caused Landry Jones to be released, he's the one that ended up being the backup for Big Ben, because he led like 6 touchdown drives or 6 scoring drives in that 2018 preseason. Was not the same guy in the 2019 preseason. In fact, he plays 80 offensive snaps. He starts the first game, week 1 of the preseason, and week 4 of the preseason he starts. Of course, Ben Roethlisberger starts week 3. Rudolph gets the week 2 start. But Dobbs has 80 snaps out of the 250. Believe it or not, Mason Rudolph had 76 and Duck Hodges had 74. Duck Hodges, for QB4, a guy that's supposed to be a camp arm, he got a lot of playing time in the preseason and really showed that maybe he had the gusto to be a quarterback in the NFL. We see the teams caught on with film. We see that he had problems either to his ability and or the play calling and some different things. I understand the play calling is going to get some people going nuts, but bear with me here. You don't necessarily want to just jump right over Josh Dobbs here, or to Josh Dobbs, because I just don't feel... number one, I don't feel that's fair. Mason Rudolph, he's getting a lot of the snaps on Wednesdays when Ben Roethlisberger has that veteran day off. Josh Dobbs was not with the team last year. He lost that job in the preseason because he just wasn't playing very well. 5 of 8, 85 yards, no TDs, no picks. First game of that preseason, Mason Rudolph went 5 of 8 for 91 with 2 touchdowns on 141 rating to Dobbs' 98.4. I could tell you Hodges here too, but Hodges on the practice squad, I don't think they'll call up. And even if they did call up, I think he would be one of the inactives. So you're going to see if Ben Roethlisberger is inactive or still on this reserve list, Dobbs will be elevated to active and get a helmet for the first time this season. If they do bring Dobbs up, it'll be the clipboard duty that Dobbs would be having otherwise. So there's still a pecking order. There's still the coaches that see this stuff. So, but I'm just going to leave Hodges off of here because I don't believe there's any way hell would have to freeze over here for him to have an opportunity to play. Somebody would have to get hurt in practice the remainder of the week. Knock on wood that does not happen. Okay, Dobbs, week 2, preseason 2019, 6 of 11, 95 yards with a pick, 45.6 rating. Rudolph, 10 of 15 for 77, doesn't throw a touchdown or an interception. Week 3, dress rehearsal. Rudolph does come in first. There's some consideration with who these guys are playing with, but Duck Hodges is putting up the numbers anyway, coming in after Dobbs in every one of these situations, or Dobbs and or Rudolph. Rudolph, 6 of 9 to Dobbs, 4 for 9. They each throw. Rudolph, 75 yards. Dobbs, 79. Each throws an interception, but Rudolph does have a touchdown. Dobbs with a 36-1 passer rating for that Week 3 game in the 2019 preseason. Rudolph in the final game, he doesn't even start. Dobbs comes in 3 of 5, 21 yards, doesn't generate anything. Rudolph comes in 7-11, 125 yards and a touchdown. That is why Mason Rudolph gets this job. I know we saw what we saw last year. I think Rudolph was fine up until he got rocked by Earl Thomas. You go all the way through that. He has to come back from concussion protocol. He plays 3 games. He's seeing ghosts. He goes up to Cleveland. He throws 4 interceptions. Passes are flying off a guy's hands. Some other things, not necessarily all his fault, but there's still 4 statistical interceptions credited to his name. He then gets his head caved in by Myles Garrett in a fight. This guy's confidence is completely wrecked by this point. With both of those instances happening, Mike Tomlin pulls the plug at halftime, brings in Duck Hodges, who doesn't do much against the Bengals at Cincinnati anyway. He does find James Washington on a busted coverage, 70-yard touchdown, I believe, and that was the one that decided this. It was a really ugly game. Because the Steelers' offense were shooting themselves in the foot. They couldn't get anything going, and the defense was shutting down the Bengals for the most part. So when I look at these matchups coming into this upcoming game, number one, Rudolph will be the starter if Ben isn't. The only way that this is detrimental to the Steelers' offense, which has been stagnant at times, Randy Fichtner needs to come up with something. It can't just be short dink and dunks. But let's also not forget, it's not all short dinks and dunks. Mason Rudolph, 24-28, 229 yards, 2 touchdowns, 43-yard long pass. So he could throw it down the field. That was from Week 4 last year when he was entrenched as the starter, his second game ever, all time. And if you really count, second full game all time playing as an NFL starter. Not every guy comes in as a first-time player and lights the world on fire. We see that with Joe Burrow right now. He's the top overall pick. He put up college numbers that are absolutely ridiculous, but he's behind a porous offensive line that has allowed him to get sacked 28 times this season. That's where it's going to be big. Andy Dalton in that same game, go back to last year, before he was benched for Ryan Finley, who didn't fare much better, sacked 8 times. The Steelers' defense getting Tyson Alualu back, that's going to bode well for stopping the run. Losing Vince Williams could hurt, but don't forget, Avery Williamson was brought on board just in time, folks, to be an insurance policy, and he's a guy that could plug the run. He could also cover in the pass game. I think Robert Spillane will do just fine there as well. And if you get Mike Hilton back, that is a big feather in the cap for the Steelers as well. I think the Steelers' defense, and this is going up on SteelCityUnderground.com, they're going to get at least 7 sacks in this game because the Bengals gave up 7 to the Ravens. They gave up 8 in another game. As I mentioned, they're averaging at least giving up 3 sacks per game, and that average has only been stretched out because the Titans 2 weeks ago could not get after Burrow to save their life. They still have a patchwork offensive line. They may be getting a few guys back. They also made a trade they got rid of Carlos Dunlap. Geno Atkins, for some reason, is not playing a whole lot, even though he is probably one of their better defensive players. Sam Hubbard could be activated. Let me rewind this. He was on injured reserve. He is now in that 21-day window, and he could be eligible to play, or if they choose this Sunday. That'll be a boost to the Bengals that they haven't had for a small portion of time. Carl Lawson's a guy that could get after the quarterback as well, but that front 7 is just not very good. I know they're looking at the Dallas Cowboys film on how to stop the Steelers because the Steelers should run the ball, particularly not abandon the run if Ben Roethlisberger's not playing. I know there's a lot of smoke where there's a fire around Ben calling plays, hurry-up offenses, and things of that nature. Just don't sell Mason Rudolph too short yet. Don't say that Dobbs – I know Dobbs could use his feet, but it looked like he was indecisive. He wasn't going to the best spots with the ball. He was holding on to it too long as well in that preseason, and often that led to him using his feet, and that gives you the perception that he could break and make some plays that perhaps you don't want him to be doing. He can't just be running the ball. It's really, that's almost like a survival mode. And that's kind of the problem you see with some of the other quarterbacks in this same division, when they can't find their guys. Joe Burrow's got some guys. Sorry, I needed a drink there. I told you to get a little long-winded. It sucks when I don't have Brian here to help me out. Give me a breather. Joe Burrow's got some guys too, but I'm not so worried with how that matches up with the Steelers' defense again. The Steelers still have some weapons, provided that the ball could get delivered to these men. Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm not so worried about the Steelers' offense. The offensive line, they should be able to push these guys around. Hopefully. I know we talked about how they didn't have the sharpest game against the Cowboys. You still had Alden Smith. You had Randy Gregory, who just came back. You had Neville Gallimore, Leighton Vander Esch. I would put the talent of those guys above, not necessarily above Geno Atkins, maybe Gallimore versus Geno Atkins, but Geno Atkins, again, he was looking to get traded. Just like Dunlap, who went to the Seahawks, he wasn't happy with his role here. So he's playing a third of the game. I don't know how that's really going to work. Mackenzie Alexander, I think, is coming back off the COVID list when you're talking about the Bengals defense. They have Sean Williams, who's been a safety there for more than a minute. Jesse Bates, a guy who we all liked here at Steel City Underground as a fit for the Steelers. He can make some plays happen. He gets beat just like anyone else, too. So when you talk about like Terrell Edmonds maybe being a weak link, I put Jesse Bates almost in that same category. Maybe a little notch above, perhaps. But it's tough when you look at this and you look at the Bengals. You look at their roster, you look at their depth chart, you look how they're going to necessarily match up against the Steelers, and the only thing they can really do is hope that Ben doesn't play and Rudolph makes some mistakes. And like I said, he doesn't seem very keen to making a whole lot of mistakes, just like Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow does not throw interceptions. He does get harassed quite a bit, and quarterbacks who get harassed lose the football. That could happen here on Sunday. In fact, that will happen here this Sunday, especially if they play, again, this sixth rounder as their left tackle. I don't care how well he did last week. You're going to put him up against Bud Dupree coming in off the blind side. Bud Dupree has been posterizing people all season long. So when I look at this, I don't know. I just don't see like Jermaine Pratt or any of these guys. Mackenzie Alexander will be a nickel corner. They've had Darius Phillips. William Jackson III has not had a very sharp go of it. Oh, I forgot. Von Bell, also another guy that's kind of geeked up for this. Another safety. He came over. Former Ohio State player, so the Buckeye that I know. A guy that I actually wanted the Steelers to take over Sean Davis back then. So I do have some respect for him as well. However, this Bengals team, this matchup, just is not looking. It's looking a lot like the Cowboys game, almost like a gimme last week. But I don't want people to panic about Mason Rudolph. Okay, I think the Steelers' offense will be just fine. When you flip over to the defense, things change a little bit more. The Steelers are fifth in points scored per game, by the way, for everyone thinking they're very anemic on offense. You could revert to the under 20 crowd again, but don't forget, Chris Boswell is a Bengal killer. This is the way sometimes these games come down, particularly in the AFC North. The Steelers are fifth in points scored, and they've only allowed the fourth most. The Bengals are 20th in each category. The Bengals are in the middle of the league for takeaways, where the Steelers are third. The Bengals are 10th in pass, 23rd in the rush. Hard to believe when they have a two-headed monster, or almost three-headed monster, with Joe Mixon, who's very versatile, Gio Bernard, mostly a passing down type guy. He did fill in a little bit while Mixon was out. And you also have Samjay Perine, who scored a rushing touchdown last week. They must feel in the goal line situation, or maybe they're just trying to get cute like everyone else thinks Randy Fichtner and that is. You're trying to fool people. Sometimes you fool yourself because of what you put out on film. We look at the Bengals, they're 23rd against the pass, 29th against the run, where the Steelers are 5 and 9 against those same categories. The Bengals, I still think the offensive line's the big problem. I don't think they have a huge threat at tight end. I know they were looking to work Drew Sample in after, what was it, Uzomah, I believe is the one who got hurt and put on IR. And we just, like Drew Sample just hasn't done much there. The biggest threats, A.J. Green has always been a threat, but I feel that he's on the back end of his career, and that more or less translates to age. We always talk about it. We talk about how when you get up to a certain age, the receivers just kind of fall off a cliff, and A.J. Green is now 32. 31 is the year. I almost give him a bye because he didn't play last year. Hurt his ankle in the very first training camp practice, actually. So he didn't play for a year, but they still have T. Higgins. They have Tyler Boyd. These are guys that are threats in the receiving game. If Joe Burrow could find them, I think that's where they'll find most of their success on offense. But again, when I look at Joe Burrow, 11 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 8 games so far, 67% completion percentage. He doesn't make a whole lot of reckless plays. However, that offensive line has gotten him, again, sacked 28 times. I think the Steelers are going to get to him at least 7. That was my prediction for the website I was mentioning earlier. I don't know how else to see how this game's going to unfold, because it's a lot different game, obviously, if Ben Roethlisberger plays. The Bengals have to prepare for just about anything, because Mike Tomlin, I didn't forget about this, by the way, but if you're Mike Tomlin, are you going to really go out and say Mason Rudolph's our starter? You're going to make the Bengals think twice about whether or not they're going to have to prepare against a mobile quarterback like Josh Dobbs. That's some gamesmanship. I don't necessarily believe for a minute that Josh Dobbs is the starter. You could see him. We saw Jalen Samuels as in a Wildcat formation. So any of these things are possible for Sunday's game. I don't want to get too long-winded here because I think I've covered most of the bases here. You got to hope that the Steelers' special teams cleans things up this upcoming Sunday, because that was a huge, huge problem that allowed the Cowboys to have better field position when they were already a desperate team that was playing more aggressive. And trust me, the Bengals are going to be aggressive. Maybe not as desperate, but 2-5-1. Their season's not necessarily out the window yet. They are behind 3 better teams, in my opinion. Not only the Steelers, but the Ravens and the Browns. This division is really heating up. And these games have been wars previously when you had Vontaze Burfict in that lineup, Paul Guenther as defensive coordinator, and things of that nature. It's still quite unknown as to whether or not Zach Taylor is the coach for this team, but they got their quarterback who could be their future franchise quarterback. So you got to pay attention to it. You got to respect it. You just never know the progress that's going to be made by Joe Burrow. I know he's a Heisman guy. Heisman guys don't necessarily translate to beating everybody up in the NFL, and quite a few of them flame out. So it's a wait-and-see approach. It's still an asterisk or a question mark. I think what he's done so far is he's looked to be competent. He's not destroying the Bengals, but the Steelers are going to bring the heat. They lead in every statistical category imagine, as far as hurry-ups by opposing quarterbacks, quarterback hits, sacks. And it's not even close. The sack number is a little closer because they've only played 8 games. Some teams have played 9. But the other percentages are through the roof. I think they lead Tampa Bay by like 12 or 13% in the hurry-ups and in double digits by the QB hits. And I want to say whoever was next actually played an additional game to that. So they're going to get after, they're going to harass Joe Burrow. I believe that's what the Bengals are going to have to limit in order to have a chance in this game, regardless of who plays quarterback for the Steelers. So look forward to seeing your comments. I don't want to belabor this any much further or longer, because I believe that's about all it really boils down to is the Bengals offensive line versus the Steelers pass rush. The Bengals passing game against the Steelers secondary, which that could be dangerous with Minkah Fitzpatrick. Mike Hilton coming back too, also big when it comes to blitzing. And then whoever plays quarterback for the Steelers. Let's see the Steelers offense get 30 points. Nothing would make my day more than seeing Mason Rudolph play on Sunday and the Steelers offense succeed, just to validate some of the things I'm saying, because I know if Brian were here, he'd be shaking his head no. he would be already chewing off all of his fingernails. He would be quite contrary to what I'm saying. I know I'm forever the optimist sometimes. I don't like to trash this team. I get called a homer. I get called biased. But it's really hard to see how when Mike Tomlin lost everything last year and still led this team to a 500 record, 8-8, and you look at where they're at 8-0 this season, I'm not chalking this up as a lot of people gloom and doom. Hey, they're losing their first game, et cetera, et cetera. Nah. Forget that. I don't think so. I think this team is too well coached, too experienced, and too talented, and also very deep at every position, even the quarterback position, to give up an L here. They would have to turn the ball over. They would have to have monumental screw-ups. I just don't see it the same way. I joke about Landry Jones being the GOAT. Landry Jones would throw the ball in the middle of the field, get picked. Very similar to the way Duck Hodges against the Buffalo Bills threw those picks. I just don't see the same exact thing happening with Mason Rudolph based on the film that I've watched of him thus far. So we'll take a chill pill on that. And by the way, we talked about this before. Everybody's always looking at whether this guy is the future franchise quarterback. The only future that matters is this Sunday. I don't care what the Steelers do in another year or two if they draft somebody else. That's not my interpretation. That's not what matters right now. What matters is getting to 9-0, and these are the guys you're riding with. You're not trading for Sam Darnold. You're not giving up a whole bunch of stuff for that, and a guy that's going to have to get paid after that as a very high first-round draft pick. And I don't necessarily know that he would be any sharper. And of course, the short week. It's just nonsense. You wouldn't get this guy prepared to play anyways, and you still don't know if Ben's going to play or not. So it's all a moot point. Not a moot point if you watch Friends. It's a moot point. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, folks. I always enjoyed speaking with you. I'll try and get on there on the horn as much as possible. Thank you for dealing with my nasally, gravelly voice, which I'm about to lose any moment here. I could have used Brian's assistance here, but at the same time, I don't need his resistance as well because he'll be the one that says, I told you so. If Ben doesn't play, one of these other quarterbacks lays an egg and something bad happens with the Steelers, such as their first loss of the season. But again, support the guy. Home game, Heinz Field, fans there. 9 straight against the Bengals. Bengals are 2-5-1. That's it. That's all you need to know. Okay? I think that works for us. So anyways, ever the optimist, my name is Joe Kuzma. And as always, I encourage everyone out there listening to be safe, be good, and I'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.